when I was just preparing this last session, it felt very difficult to know what to put in and what not to put in, because basically, I think I said last week, there's so much to do with books that you could carry on indefinitely. And that's why I called this session "The End is the Beginning," because really one never ends and there are always new beginnings, which is what is so wonderful and inspiring about reading, and particularly reading with children. I mean, if I take myself as quite an ancient example now, I mean, I've been reading to children since I was in my teens, really. So it's a lifetime of reading, and I still find new books. So traveling is learning, a very wise proverb. And let's see where we travel together today. Starting with a little recap of last week, because a week is long. I was talking about, great books, and I think I mentioned that this In the Never Ending Wood is one full of stories which can really transport us to so many different worlds and lives and experiences, only in English. And it's the kind of book, it's a reminder that part of our role as literacy activists is that we really ought to agitate for what we need in the literacy ecosystem. And particularly, we need books that are in African languages, and they, as we'll talk about today, don't have to be always original ones. They can be translated ones. There's a whole mix of what we need. One very significant aspect that I talked about, and I just want to reiterate it and re-emphasize it, is that when we are reading, when we're writing, when children are playing and we're playing with them, we are moving into a symbolic mode where we basically suspend what we know to be true sometimes and enter into another space, which is also a reality, but it's a space of imagination. It's a space of what if, and it is that which is so powerful for children. So the really significant thing about this is that reading aloud opens up children's imaginations, play opens up their imaginations, and this is what leads to creative, critical, inventive thinking later on. So with young children, we want to open up that space and not close it down, because we want them to be behaving symbolically and exploring how symbols work in their lives. So just looking at this little illustration, we've got a book. The input of the book brings ideas into our heads that maybe we hadn't been thinking about. We can then have the children actually play with objects, or maybe just play with made-up objects. Here there are actually little goats. And then also the writing side of it comes into it as children are learning to write, because they then are inspired to write. And writing is a second-order symbolic system, because it stands for reality, then it stands for ideas. We put it down and we make sense of it. So children are great symbolic beings, but they need to have that symbolic ability nourished. Okay, and this is continuing with this, really, the whole idea of the gift of our imaginations and how we can extend books into the imaginary realm, but it always is connecting to real life. So it starts with real life, whatever our real life experiences are, but then we extend and deepen and expand. And Tchaikovsky wrote this very succinctly, where he said, without imaginative fantasy, there would be complete stagnation in both physics and chemistry, because the formulation of new hypotheses, the invention of new implements, the discovery of new methods of experimental research, the conjecturing of new chemical fusions. All these are products of imagination and fantasy, the ability to say, what if, and move outside of what exists at the moment. Okay, so we've got to value and respect pretend. We've got to raise ourselves to the level of what if, of pretend. I then moved on last week to talking about books for that are inclusive of children who are have disabilities or are different in some way, and we looked at we started to look at books for older children. And of course, all of these things that I'm talking about, and in fact everything that I've talked about in these sessions, they're all just touching part of what is there to explore. And you are definitely going to deepen your journeys from where you're at. I can see already in the WhatsApp group. It's so lovely that people are starting to share their own ideas and so on. I think we should just keep that going, I hope. Okay, so this is what we want as parents or as teachers even. It's bedtime. Don't let me catch you reading. And the child and the adult are both kind of, actually the child wants to read, the adult wants the child to read, so is trying to sort of build that little tension where the child feels they're doing something that is illicit and so wants to do it. So it's that, how do we get children to read? One of the books that I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but Dragon Mode is a book that, it is a South African book at Songololo, which is an imprint of what Arabella knows, Shooter and Shooter. Dragon Mode was a book that was shared with a group of children where we were doing a story play project. And I have to say that none of the adults who were working liked this book much. It was just a book that was given to us. We didn't like it much because we were worried that it wasn't going to be relevant to the children. The children were in an informal settlement, and these are middle-class little white children. This character is a boy who is very modern and cool and quite wild, but he goes into what he calls dragon mode, okay, and becomes this dragon. And fascinatingly, I'm not going to read it to you. You can find it if you want it. Fascinatingly, the children absolutely loved this book. It really stimulated their imaginations. They loved the idea of exploring what a dragon is. And we made this little book afterwards, which I just want to show you briefly because it was just a little collection of what we did with the children, where they made a den for the dragon, where there were stories told about dragons, and where the adults go and write down the children's stories about dragons, where they created a home just out of, out of packaging, out of boxes, a home for the dragon, and painted their pictures for the dragons, and just noting that stories start with imagination on the page when you're doing written stories. So the drawing is really important, the painting. All of this stimulates children writing for a purpose, okay? And these are little children. These aren't children who already are doing much writing or reading. Then we made a house full of story dragons. You can see there. There's one of the dictated stories. Here's one of the dictated stories. You can see how much young children who can't write yet have to say when they're stimulated by being read to a lot. Then they have their own stories that they want to get down so that they can read them again. Thinking. It all takes thinking, and it's very, very interesting to note how children can become terribly aware of the thinking process. Yeah, and so on. So I'll just show you the end where they created these dragons just out of leaves and little googly eyes, which my colleagues like to use. And the children really enjoy doing that kind of thing. So there's a whole multimodal set of activities that can take place from a book, and unexpected books can stimulate quite a lot. Books for older children. This, I don't know if any of you have come across The Shadow. It's a New Africa Books publication. It's available in all languages. It's been around for a long time. And this book, at one point, many teachers didn't want to use it with children because they felt that it was too old for them and too scary. So I'll just show you. The writer is Thembinkosi Kholi, who has carried on to do quite a bit more. I'll show you a few of his things, and you can see he has this very distinctive illustration style. So it's about this little character who just says, "What is this?" So, oh, no. Gets frightened. Why is he frightened? What is that? What is he seeing? You can grow. Ooh. You can move. Ooh. So very scary, the story. Now, the question that you'd need to ask yourselves is, scary in a way that will really frighten children, or scary in a way that will allow children to explore fear in a safe space? Often a book can be a safe space to explore something uncomfortable. So that is a question for you to think about, maybe discuss among each other or with others, whether books like this are appropriate and who for. I mean, one of the things that is important is that children who can't read a lot yet themselves, or can't read yet themselves, have books with little text so that they can start learning to read without being overwhelmed by too much print. So this is definitely one of those. In the end, the shadow says, I'm with you in the dark and in the light. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I am your shadow. So there's a resolution at the end of this scary story, which is illustrated very vividly by Thembinkosi Kholi. And as I say, it's available in all these languages. And it's definitely one of those books that older children could use if you don't want younger children to be exposed to something that might be scary. It's worth trying out, though. Now, this is one of the things, as you become a person who likes children's books or looks at children's books and explores children's books so that you can be the guide and the role model, you start to get to know illustrators as well and people's styles. And you can see here, this was a previous set of Little Hands books that Thembinkosi did with us at PRAESA many, many years ago. But you can see that style is the same. And then I see he's done quite a few other books. So I'm just showing you with New Africa Books where he uses the same way of illustrating. That is interesting. Multilingual books. I don't know if anybody wants to comment in the chat and say anything about what your thoughts are about having books which have more than one language in them at a time. I'm showing you this book as an example because it's a book that I can share parts with you if you're interested, because it was something that we made many years ago now and it's out of print. But it does have some stories in it that are still worth reading with children. And as you see here, this is actually in 4 languages because it was part of a project to connect with children who were living in Belgium and spoke Dutch, as well as children here who spoke Afrikaans, and then it was also in isiXhosa. So everything in this book is multilingual, and the way it's done, you can see, is to use a different color for each language. And apart from the stories, what's also done is it's not exactly the same text in each language. So there are choices made about multilingual books or bilingual books, and it's also something that you will think about when you come across a bilingual book. You think, what is its purpose? Who am I going to read this to? What will it achieve that a single language book doesn't achieve? And there are different reasons for producing multilingual books. So this particular story that I wanted to just draw your attention to is about a little guy called Safudi. It's called Safudi's Sadness. And it's actually based on the life of a famous South African artist who was called Dan Safudi Rakwate. I'm not sure if I can pronounce his name right. Rakwate, it's over here. Some of you may know him. He's died now, sadly, but Donve Lanham, the author, interviewed him, and then she wrote the story based on his life. And it's a story about how art and drawing and creativity nurtured him and helped him become strong to overcome a very difficult life where he had a lot of deaths. His mother died when he was young and so on. So he always drew, and there was always paper, crayons, paints for him. And the story is really a story about how he overcame his sadness, and the fact that it is available in 3 South African languages used in South Africa, just makes it a useful resource. It's not intended to teach the other languages to children, but just to be available. And when one follows these themes, so here's a theme about art and imagination and creativity, helping to strengthen, to make strong, make people strong. Here's another book which Arabella shared with me, which is very lovely to share with you because it comes from another continent. Frida Kahlo, some of you will know, was a very famous Mexican artist, and she also had a very, very difficult life. And here's a book which I don't know if we'd be able to get hold of very easily. It's published by Francis Lincoln Books in the UK. One probably can get hold of it, but the reason I'm sharing it with you is because it's a very good example also of a book for older children, perhaps, which is also a picture book, like the Shadow that I shared with you, but very different. So Frida Kahlo, this artist who used drawing and painting to express herself, she had an imaginary friend as a child. And I'm just going to show you a few pages from the book, because I think that the illustration as well is so vivid and is such a different style from what we've been looking at. Part of what we do is we become discerning about which illustrations which kind of illustrations speak to us and catch our attention or make us feel really inspired to continue with the book. And I know that this is one that many people find very beautiful. So here she is with an imaginary friend whose name is Frida as well. And she did have an imaginary friend as a child. So it's a book telling you about the life of Frida Kahlo, but in a very accessible way for children. She falls very ill and she's in bed for months. There's something wrong with one of her legs. Even her imaginary friend can't cheer her up. That's when Frida teaches herself to draw. Drawing saves her from being sad. So that human theme of sadness, and it's touched on in these two stories that I know of. There are many more, I'm sure, but I think it's useful to see how picture books pick up themes, and you get to know which ones are the ones that you want to use. So here she has a horrible accident and is crushed by a bus, almost dies. You can see how the illustrations are extremely dreamlike, actually. For me, I don't know about you. You would have your own feelings about it. And it is painting always that saves her life. So this power of creativity, power of imagination. And if you go then to look at Frida Kahlo's work, if you can just Google her, you will find that this Jonah Winter, who wrote this book, and the illustrator, has really captured a lot of the atmosphere and the feeling that Frida Kahlo captures herself in her work. Okay, so I'm just sort of expanding our boundaries all the time. We're always looking out to see what's there. And I love this quote from Amin Maalouf, who's a very famous writer whose work has been translated into many, many languages. Here it says more than 40 languages. He said, when the spirit of men, could be women, seems narrow to you, tell yourself that the earth is vast. Never hesitate to walk away beyond all seas, beyond all borders, from all countries, from all beliefs. So it's a quote to inspire us to be brave, to break out and not allow ourselves to become boxed in. The boundaries are all porous to explore. And so exploring books in translation a bit, you know, some of you will have grown up having had Pinocchio read to you, I should imagine. Others will never have heard of Pinocchio. Pinocchio is one of the most popular, or the most popular, children's story in the world, because it's been translated into more than 260 languages. That's amazing. And through our project, we translated it into isiXhosa, and I think isiZulu and Sesotho, Afrikaans. I can't remember all of them now, but they are available from New Africa Books. And the value of this story, apart from it being a great story, is it's one of the books that can get children's reading stamina developing. It can get our reading stamina developing as well, because reading stamina is a bit like it needs exercising, like our muscles do. And often I hear people say, oh, there are too many pages in that book. Pinocchio is a long book, but it can be read to older and even younger children chapter by chapter. So one doesn't have to read it all at the same time. You break it up into manageable bits. Geppetto, and this was a very interesting book to translate, like all books are interesting to translate, because we had to decide whether it would cross cultural and linguistic boundaries and borders. And my Xhosa-speaking colleagues who did the work on this book decided that it would, because it's about a little wooden boy who gets carved by a man, Geppetto, who's his father. And it's basically the story of how this little wooden puppet magically over a long journey becomes a real boy. And he becomes a real boy through gaining a sense of right and wrong and through his education. I won't read any of this to you now because I don't think there's going to be time. But the way that this book was retold for South Africa was that it was versioned so that Pinocchio's name is still Pinocchio because it's such a famous name. In fact, Pinocchio was Italian. It was written by an Italian in the 1800s. So it's been retold over and over and over because essentially it's a story that stands the test of time. And but the spelling, and I couldn't find the Xhosa version now to show you, but the spelling in Xhosa is in the Xhosa, the logic of the Xhosa language. So it's Pinoki, Pinocchio, Y-O. It's not spelt the same, but it's pronounced the same. And that's the great work that translators do to make sure that young children in their own language find the story connects to their lives just like it does, or transports them into a world in a way that they still feel connected to that story. It speaks to something in them. Right. Another one, another translation, and I'm telling you about this as well because this one is available on our website for download for isiXhosa speaking adults and children. So one can read it online or one can download it. And it is a story which was originally written also by one of the greatest writers for children called Astrid Lindgren, who's a Swede. She was a Swede. She died in 1982. And Astrid Lindgren, oh, I can't see this now to read it to you. Could you read it for yourselves? Because I've got too much over it. She was a really special, strong defender of children's rights. She fought against corporal punishment. She was against all forms of violence and oppression. And her books speak to children with deep respect about issues that are very dear to children. And it's amazing because these great books continue to have value in modern times. They sometimes get adapted and changed, as we know with what is happening at the moment with some books where there are ways of expressing things and attitudes that are believed to be wrong. We do censor and we change books over time. We always have done that. Sometimes it goes very far, so far that, for example, in the United States, they're banning certain books. This isn't the case with this Astrid Lindgren's book here. There have been cases where her books have been changed because some of her language and her expressions weren't seen as appropriate. This is a book also, I don't know why I'm stuck on this theme of dying and sadness, but it deals with death in a way that is so powerful that if one Googles this book, The Brothers Lionheart, the Brothers Lionheart, you will find people talking about it on websites where they say that this was the book that influenced them and that stayed with them their whole lives. And it's about two brothers, and one dies. One is very ill and one dies. And in fact, they had tuberculosis in those days there, and they had poverty, and they had issues that really speak to children in South Africa and other African contexts now, which is interesting. But these little boys go to a land where there is no death, where there's no illness, but there are a lot of adventures and challenges. So anyone who's interested in that, who is a Xhosa speaker here, I would so urge you to have a look at the Xhosa version and let us know if you do get to read it with children. Last one I think that I'm talking about here is the this need in South Africa and all over contexts where languages have been hindered from growing in terms of book development through, in South Africa, apartheid and colonialism. We don't have books for children which cover all the great themes that we need children to be reading about. This book, which is in Xhosa, is another one which is really challenging. It was even challenging translators, because they had to develop some of the terminology, because as you can see, this is a book which goes into space and the universe. It's got information about how the universe was formed and how it works, as well as being an adventure story. And this was written by Lucy Hawking, who you see here, who's the daughter of that very famous physicist, Stephen Hawking, who died a couple of years ago now, who was in a wheelchair always and was really a physicist who caught the world, the imagination of the world. And it felt to some of us that children here should be able to experience and read about these things in an accessible story-like way. So that's why this book was done. It was, as you can see, it's a really big book. It's in Zulu, it's in Sesotho, it's in isiXhosa, and it is available from Jacana Publishers. And this book will challenge everybody's reading stamina, including mine. So, of course, there are 5 of these books by Lucy Hawking and Stephen Hawking, but we only could do the one at this point. So it would be great to hear from any of you who do get round to reading that. And maybe just to say also that in terms of when one's choosing books, this was one of those books where it was decided by the translator, by everybody involved, that this book was too far away from South Africa, from Africa, to change the characters in it. Because some books, like Pinocchio, although the character didn't change, there were adaptations made to make children feel that they were in South Africa when they read the story. The story is about South Africa. Here, the story is definitely still set in another land, and that's fine, because we need to know about here and us, and we also need to know about there and them, but in our own languages that we understand and can think and feel in. And just to show that, we are really making progress in South Africa, at least, we have now African stories also, but for younger children. And I'm sure that if you were here when we looked at Eco Girl, you'll recognize the Zimbabwean writer and illustrator Ken Wilson Max's Unoma Kwezi, which is Astro Girl. So this is a story about this little girl who goes into space. So connections. We can start to explore these great world themes and important factors about life in our languages for children of all ages. We have to push. The Happy Prince is another example. I'm sharing this with you because The Happy Prince was one of my favorite stories, and it was a favorite story of a friend of mine, and we did a version. We're allowed to version books that are out of print, that are old, and there are many versions of The Happy Prince as well, all over the world, because it's a story by Oscar Wilde, and it's just one of those stories that speak to people, adults and children. It's about a statue that stands above a town, looking out over the town, and it's very full of jewels and beautiful statue. But this statue is alive in some way and very sad because he looks down and he sees unhappiness and poverty. And a little bird flies up to him. Here you can see the little bird, swallow. It's a little swallow. And over the course of the story, the swallow helps to enrich others by taking bits of the Happy Prince's jewelry and ultimately his eyes out, which are all made out of golden jewelry, to share with others. So it's a story of giving. Very beautiful story, and it is also available here. It's one of those stories which, again, you need a bit of stamina. Children need a bit of stamina, but this is what we need for listening to. We need storybooks that challenge us to really concentrate and focus. The Afrikaans, by the way, for those of you who used Afrikaans, is retold by Antjie Krog, who is one of South Africa's great poets. So it's beautiful language. Right. How am I doing for time? I'll just tell you about this last translated book, which is different from all the others because this is a book, The Hidden Star, which is written in English originally by one of South Africa's great writers, K. Sello Duiker. Some of you may know of him. He was young. He didn't write a lot, but what he wrote was for adults and was very, it's hugely respected in South Africa. This one book called The Hidden Star, he wrote, I don't know if he wrote it for children, but it's about children. It's about an 11-year-old girl called Nolitye. She lives in a township called Pola, and the story is about her and others' adventures to find children who have gone missing. And it's a story steeped in African mythology, but set in modern time, township South Africa. And that's all I'm going to say. It's a brilliant, I loved it. And so we facilitated the translation of it with the publisher Penguin Random House. It's not available yet, but it will be available in the next couple of months. And it was translated into isiXhosa, as you can see here, by Xolisa Guzula. So that's an example of, well, this book I would really urge those of you who can only get it in English to do so, because it is available, and those of you who use Xhosa to look out for it when it comes out and to start reading it with older children in your lives and for yourselves as well. So that's that. Inclusive books. South Africa is getting an expanded library of inclusive books, if you like, as there's this awareness here and all over the world now, thank goodness, finally, to make sure that books reflect the look, the experiences of everyone. And this book, some of you may know it already. It's published by New Africa Books, by Sindiwe Magona, who has written prolifically. I haven't shared much of her, I don't think, but you will find her everywhere if you start looking for her name. She wrote this book with a scientist, I think, about how skin color comes to be what it is. So it's a book about race, but it's a book about explaining how we come to be different, to look different, basically. And it's available in all the South African languages and in English, of course. For younger children, there are increasing numbers of books which are speaking to Ubuntu, which are speaking to doing things in an anti-racist or non-racist, non-prejudiced way. And Refilwe Moahloli is one of them. I'm just going to take you through a few of these. Wonder the Brave, most of you probably know already. This is, I think, won an award recently. Wanda's a little girl who's brave in this story because she has to have her hair treated, and she really, really, really finds it painful. There's poor little Wanda going through this now. I think this book could be used to raise a lot of issues about identity and about how we look, and whether we should need to do things like that to our hair, or all of those issues is in Wonder the Brave. And then there's this other story here, again, some nice and big, so nice for sharing with a group of children, as is Wonder. These are both from Jacana. Take Your Place, You Belong. I'm sure you can guess from the cover what this theme is going to be. You might be able to guess. Pop it in the chat if you want to. It's a story which describes how two friends look by their skin color, their hair, their eyes, and then also what they love to do. And they basically get on really well, and they get on despite the fact that they are different. But then what happens with these two is they come across other children, and the book's a very fair book because it first has black children excluding the white girl. She feels sad to be excluded, she's not wanted. And then her friend decides to play with her rather instead. And then the same thing happens with white children. So it's exploring racism, but in a very gentle way, because they don't actually, Karen Tierneson, who wrote it, doesn't mention racism, but it's the kind of book that you could look at with children, read to children, and then explore issues of exclusion and prejudice. It lends itself to that. There are other kinds of exclusion, as we all know, and Omar Ruby's Secret is one beautiful book by Chris van Wyk, who also was a great South African writer who sadly died. Omar Ruby has a secret, and her little grandson doesn't realize until it's a real story. It probably is a story about Chris van Wyk's Omar, as he says, a real story about a real boy and a real Omar. And what he discovers through this beautifully illustrated book as well, very vivid, that his granny Omar Ruby cannot read. So it's a book which basically explores literacy in a very gentle and beautiful way, because Omar Ruby takes Chris, her little grandson, she takes him to buy some books. So the story is focusing on reading, and he wants her to read, but she can't, and that's what the story is about, and how it doesn't matter that she can't read, because others can read for her. I really recommend this. It's a Pan Macmillan story, and I should think, yes, it will. One of the clues of whether a book is available in different languages is if you see a language at the bottom of somewhere, usually there. Right. Someone on our WhatsApp group was asking about books and got lots of great recommendations from others about girl power books. Well, you can see some of the ones that I've mentioned have already been that. This is a particularly overt one, Dare, and it's also one of those books that wasn't originally here, but now it's in all probably several South African languages, and basically it's the kind of book you could use for any age, I think. It's very simple. It's like a book on enhancing self-esteem and becoming brave, becoming bold, and dare to dream, dare to aspire, dare to trust, dare to inspire. It rhymes as well. And you could be talking with children, obviously, about what the illustrations are suggesting. Dare to do what hasn't been done. Sail out in your sailing ship. What is something that has never been done that you think you want to do? Could be something to think about. Dare to be second to none. And so it goes. This is one of those little books which is all about having confidence. And you can see how these stories can sometimes very gently address issues without actually forcing them or being didactic in any way. So it really can just be in the reading and in the talking, but the talking where one is listening to the children and asking them in an open-ended way what they think, what they feel, because this isn't about what I think is right to tell the children. It's about allowing the children the opportunity with the books to start thinking and start connecting to how they understand things. Another one also mentioned in the WhatsApp group by, I think she was Miss World. No, not Miss World, Miss South Africa. Also about daring to dream, daring to be beautiful inside and out. Very readily available. Okay, we're running out of time. Just to note that the wordless books are a whole category of books that you might like to explore. In South Africa, we tend to be keen on wordless books at the moment, but for very young children. I just want to mention, well, this is one that I know was available in South Africa some while ago and could really be used in a very nice way for children to tell their own story, to connect to it. There are so many wordless books globally that are absolutely amazing, beautifully illustrated and written about. I don't have time to go into detail now with you, but from so many countries, there are so many wordless books, And these are available on a IBI International website, or at least available for you to have a look at what is there. I'm not going to be able to go through them now, I don't think. If people are interested in it, I could do a whole course on wordless books, actually, because the thing about wordless books is that in our brains, coming back to our brains, which we started the first session with, is that we have a blind spot, which we don't realize we have. Everybody. This is just part of how our brains work and how our eyes function and our optic nerve and everything. So when we look, there's actually a spot, like it's quite big. I'm not exactly sure how big, but it's, it's big. And when we're looking, we're not seeing certain things. And they've done experiments which have proven that this blind spot is there for all of us. And what it shows is that very little information is actually taken in by the brain while we are inspecting the world, while we are doing whatever we're doing, and how much is supplied by your experience, by your actual brain. So remember at the very beginning, we talked about how we use patterns and predictions and our experience to make sense of the world. So the richness here, it says, the richness of our individual experience is largely illusory. We actually see very little and rely on educated guesswork to do the rest. So educated guesswork, what he means here is that based on our prior experience, our brain makes an educated guess about what should be there. And so when you look at wordless picture books, you really get that showing through very strongly, because different people will interpret the same book, which has no words, very differently. We all have our own stories to bring to whatever it is we're reading. Okay. And that is something to remember when you're reading with children, because you read the words and you somehow do them a lot of benefit if you allow them the space and the time to give how they feel and think about it. And you do how you feel and think as well, but not in a way that shuts them out and shuts them up. So books to wonder and think with. This, The Girl with 21 Questions. It's a great book, which written by Boitumelo Motupi. And it's a book for young children, but it's also a book for anyone. When, who, how, why, where, what. It's about a little girl who can't stop asking questions, and how everybody gets really tired of her asking questions, actually. She asks her mother, she asks her brother, her friends, her teacher, her neighbors. She asks all kinds of things about planets, about the universe, about how the stars stay in the sky, why does a giraffe have such a long neck, and so on and so on. And in the end, in this book, she becomes a writer and gives answers to some of the questions herself. And it's just a lovely, inspiring book, again, about confidence, power, curiosity, what inspires us, what gives us purpose. So I highly recommend this one as well. It's also Pan Macmillan and available in other languages. I sincerely hope, yes, it should be. Sometimes beautiful books are adapted from poems, from poetry. And E. Cummins, not a South African poet, has this poem called I Carry Your Heart With Me. And Arabella shared this very beautiful, beautifully illustrated image from a book, which is basically just sharing that there are these children's adaptations of adult poems, but which which deal with these important emotional human themes, the story of a mother carrying her child and then introducing her to the wonders of the world, showing the strong bond of love between mother and child within nature and throughout life. So it's something to always look out for in secondhand bookshops or on sales or wherever you go. Are these kind of books that you feel may inspire you and your child to have a really interesting time or to stimulate their curiosity about something. If you go to this website, you'll find the spoken version with subtitles. There are a whole lot of versions of this beautiful poem. And I can send you in the WhatsApp group also the poem after the session. So we're coming to the end. Storytelling and story reading. Somebody has asked, I think it's Kathleen, and she couldn't be here today. What's the difference between storytelling and story reading? Well, of course, both can use rich language to engage our senses, for us to make meaning, feel, imagination, empathy, and so on. And the point about story reading and storytelling is that both should continue. There is no great education system in the world where there isn't storytelling and reading, okay? They have value in themselves, and telling does and can bridge us from oral to written language. So we always link, but the point is that storytelling has its very own place. And I mean, storytelling is theater, storytelling is art, storytelling is music. So it depends how broad you want to go. But if one just talks about orally telling stories as opposed to, or in relation to using a book with pictures, with storytelling, it's the presence of the teller that really engages the listener. Okay, the audience. The audience is connecting to the teller. The teller is using gestures, is using their voice, is using props, maybe their body, to tell that story so that the audience makes meaning. With story reading, we have shared attention onto the book. Okay, with young children, when they're just listening, they might be dreaming, then it might feel like a storytelling. But when children and adults are sharing attention on the illustrations and the writing of a book, that is the big difference, obviously. And along with that goes the fact that the words and the visuals do not change. They are there again and again and again. So it's the permanence of print that is so different. Stories can be retold in many different ways. They embroidered, they become, the theme stays the same, but the story changes. With a book, you can change the story yourself, but if you want to, you have the words that stay the same over and over and over. So if you observe a child, okay, if you observe a child with a text that they know, you can get to know where children are at in terms of reading, because some children at the beginning of their learning to read journey will just make up stories. They look at the visuals. Probably they don't point. Probably they don't match words. Or also probably they don't tell the story accurately. And they may not even be really looking at the words at all. And they might turn the pages any old how. So you can tell when you see a child like that they haven't yet developed what I shared with you before, those concepts of print, which are so crucial. Now, those concepts of print develop not in a straight line. There's no hierarchy, and you don't teach them in a didactic way. It's a bit like it is an apprenticeship. It's an apprenticeship into what being a reader means, and it includes all of these things. So you might notice that the child tells the story in an accurate way and uses visual clues or cues from the illustrations. They might still not point and they might not match any words, but they have an awareness of print and they may be turning the pages correctly. So getting the right words to match the what's on the page, and they may be able to read big, bold words and speech bubbles, words in speech bubbles, or words that are the sounds of animals or the sounds that people make. They start to pick out those because their attention is drawn by those, okay? So it's all about sharing attention. Why? Where? You see, that immediately draws their attention, and the point of your finger and the you sharing attention with saying, that says why. And look, there's a question mark because it's a question. That's what they need, and then they will start to notice those kind of things as they go along. Then you more or less get to a child who reads a story using their finger, if you've been showing them how to use their finger, because they want to follow. And so then you get the accurate retelling with the finger going along lines, often matching beginning and ends of the line with the voice and the finger. And they look at visuals, but they also returning to the print. They might be looking at the shape of a word. They might be looking at letters at either end of the word. If you are a close observer of your children who are with you in small, close readings, once you've been doing a lot of reading aloud, you will start to see these kind of things. And then, of course, the last one is children doing accurate and fluent reading. So they've absorbed it. And sometimes we don't know how. We really don't always know how. That little boy that I showed you in the very beginning of this series of these sessions, he will be reading, and his parents will say, how did he do that? He got what he needed from the adults and the material in the way that helped him to make sense of it all. I just wanted to share this as a last thing with you, because in the end, I know we all do come back to this thing of wanting to be the people who guide and help children in learning how to read and how to write. And I just wanted to share this with you because I worked with a little girl a bit over the last couple of years online when it was COVID, and she loved Frozen. And so there's always something you can do to in an informal way, help them to notice print so that they start making those connections and start actually reading. So Frozen, she loved, and it was the story of Anna and Elsa. And I wrote her a letter, but I had shown her Anna, and online I was showing her, and I, of course, don't know Frozen that well. So I said Anna and Ella instead of Elsa. And so I should have said Elsa, but I said, dear Anna, remember we looked at your name and Ella. We found an A at the end of both names and 2 letters in the middle and 4 letters each. Have a look at your family's names. How do they look? Ask mommy and daddy. So in the moment, that's a little moment where Anna was really keen on Frozen, on Elsa. I made the mistake to do Ella, but it didn't really matter because we were looking together when we did, and I sent her this letter, which then her mum read to her. So I'm just saying that there are very strong connections between reading aloud, loving reading aloud, and then having a little moment where you can actually deepen their knowledge of how we write. And how we know when children are developing and where this reading aloud is helping, we have to observe them. We see how they shift in interest from disinterested to wanting to listen. They want to browse and borrow books. They ask adults to read. They recognize some books. They talk about their preferences. You can see them reading alone with others. Sometimes it's just very seldom to regularly, and obviously they begin to recommend books. Then you know that this child is hooked. And that, after all, is what we want. And that's what we want to be able to notice and understand. So good luck on your journey. Arabella and I have been on a journey together for a long time, as you can see me there quite some years ago and Arabella there some years ago. And just to sum it up, it's hard to sum it all up, but you see you have this overlapping, always linking, overlapping, holistic, non-compartmentalized process, which involves our behavior, our behaving like a reader, our emotions, our desire, our motivation, our confidence, our identity, and our mind, our brain, where we're doing the meaning, always meaning making, and we're comprehending, and we're learning the grammar and the technical phonics and other skills that we need to learn. So becoming a reader is a complex interplay of all these things. And of them, reading aloud is the big whoosh factor that starts it all off and keeps it going as well when it's needed. So thank you. That's me, done.